I was under the impression that Bitcoin didn't have smart contracts. What have I been lied to this whole time, or is this a semantics issue?
So it is definitely a semantics issue. So there's a whole spectrum of what is it, a smart contract, and the spectrum of that, like full Turing complete arbitrary code execution, not something you can do on Bitcoin. But if you think about it for a moment, like a multi-signature, it's a form of a smart contract. You have 3 keys, 2 of the 3 signed, you can go to go. Now, Bitcoin has many things. You're probably in your audience are familiar with opcodes, right? There are ways you can do things in how you execute your Bitcoin logic. Bitcoin has things like op-if, but you can actually use an op-if for, like, let's say this crazy hypothetical of a conditional statement, like if this, then that. Right. And so this allows you to actually encode your Bitcoin address with many different ways you can secure it. So multi-signature, which is the main way large sums of Bitcoin are probably stored. But multi-signature has really been around since 2012. The advanced custody space, it really hasn't evolved since then. And so Miniscript is actually a fully open source project that came out of the team at Blockstream. And the whole premise around this was, can we do more advanced Bitcoin custody contracts leveraging time locks, signatures, like we use all the time in hash locks, and can you use these with all like and or logic to do more robust custody? This is just a really handy heuristic for being able to kind of take custody up to the next level.
Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2. I'm Charlie Spears from Blockspace Media. Bitcoin Season 2 features new topics and new faces on the oldest blockchain. And today I have Rob Hamilton for the 69th episode. Yes, the very special, honorable 69th episode. Rob Hamilton is a Miniscript influencer by day and a Miniscript influencer by night. But his real job is also CEO and co-founder of Anchorwatch, which is a very interesting custody and insurance platform. But before that, I won't get in the way. I'll actually bring him up here. Rob, thank you so much for coming on Bitcoin Season 2.
Thanks, and nice. You have me on the 69th episode. Great work.
Yeah, it was totally planned. You know, I couldn't have orchestrated it better. There's no one I'd rather have. I'll end that pun there. So okay. So what is Anchorwatch? You've started it a while ago. Let's just get right into it.
Yeah. So started the company in March of 2022. The whole premise around it was offering insurance for Bitcoin in custody. If you think about Bitcoin, we often use the idea of it's like digital gold, right? Kind of like the contrarian thesis my co-founder Becca and I had was that as Bitcoin continues to grow and financialize, that insured custody was going to be a layup, especially in the context of how much people pay for uninsured custody today across all of the custodians and the ETFs, right? Or if there is insurance that exists, it's a small little policy that, I think Coinbase has a $350 million policy and they have $400 billion plus of assets, right? So you start looking at the math, you're like, this is not a proper protection, right? And if you can insure your bar of gold, you can insure fine art and paintings, why can't you insure your Bitcoin? So that's kind of the initial concept. And from there, 2 parts. There's the insurance. We are what's called a Lloyd's of London cover holder. So we are official agents of Lloyd's of London. When you buy an Anchorwatch policy, it is a Lloyd's of London insurance policy. And on the other side is the tech, which is Trident Vault, leveraging Miniscript, as you mentioned in the opening, which is a way of doing Bitcoin native smart contracts that work today without a fork to do more advanced custody arrangements. And those two kind of get all tied together. I'll take it from there.
I guess I'll take it from there. You said smart contracts. Well, hold up, Rob. I was under the impression that Bitcoin didn't have smart contracts. What have I been lied to this whole time, or is this a semantics issue?
So it is definitely a semantics issue. So there's a whole spectrum of what is it, a smart contract, and the spectrum of that, like full Turing complete arbitrary code execution, not something you can do on Bitcoin. But if you think about it for a moment, like a multi-signature, it's a form of a smart contract. You have 3 keys, 2 of the 3 signed, you can go to go. Now, Bitcoin has many things. You're probably in your audience are familiar with opcodes, right? There are ways you can do things in how you execute your Bitcoin logic. Bitcoin has things like op-if, right? That's what the ordinals audience would know, op0, op-if, right? Being able to do that.
That's where your JPEG is. It's after the op-if.
It's after the op-if, but you can actually use an op-if for, let's say this crazy hypothetical of a conditional statement, like if this, then that, right? And so this allows you to actually encode your Bitcoin address with many different ways you can secure it over time. This is just a really handy heuristic for being able to kind of take custody up to the next level. So multi-signature, which is the main way large sums of Bitcoin are probably stored. Or you're doing something like an MPC where you're taking a single key and sharding it across multiple parts. The idea is you don't want the secret sitting at one place, whether you're using multi-signature MPC. But multi-signature has really been around since 2012. It got kind of updated in 2014 with pay-to-script hash, but the advanced custody space, it really hasn't evolved since then. And so Miniscript is actually a fully open source project that came out of the team at Blockstream and ANSIPA, Andrew Polstra and Sanket. And the whole premise around this was, can we do more advanced Bitcoin custody contracts leveraging time locks, signatures, like we use all the time, and hash locks? And can you use these with all like and or logic to do more robust custody? And it does it in a sane way. I call it like bowling with bumpers, where you're not going, if you tried writing your own arbitrary code, you have to make sure it doesn't have unintended consequences. And what Miniscript does is it really collapses that in there. So the way you're trying to design and execute your script is the way it could be used. And there aren't other ways you can inadvertently try and spend it.
Yeah, I think, I'm not entirely sure what my audience is yet. It's episode 69. I don't think I'll fully understand like the cognitive level of my audience until we get to episode 100. So maybe I'll bounce around in between these bumpers, just on just the types of questions I'll ask. So like, I just, for the person who made it this far and they don't understand what the hell you're talking about like script, like when people think that I'm going to send my Bitcoin from this wallet to that address, they just think, oh, I just need the address and then Bitcoin magically goes. It knows where to go. Like, how do you explain what is happening to that person? Like, how do you explain what we're doing?
Yeah, so I'm going to keep it in generalities without going into every little edge case. Most Bitcoin today, the way it's secured is it's actually a hash. You have some spending rules and then you hash it, and which means that you kind of like collapse it down and like make it a unified like data type. And then it gets encoded into what's called base 58, which is you have your Bitcoin address is what you see when you look at, right? The base 58 encoding actually just removes zeros and O's and L's and I's, like things that could look very similar at a glance. So that's what a Bitcoin address is. It's in this format called base 58. Now, what happens is if, let's say, Charlie, I want to send you a Bitcoin. Let's say I have a single signature, right? What I do technically under the hood is I say, look at this previous UTXO, this previous output that hasn't been spent yet. I'm going to reveal the pre-image to this hash, and maybe it's just my single signature key. And I could say, here's my key, and here's my signature. And what that does is you say, okay, well, your key matches this hash, so it matches the address where the funds are currently sitting, and the signature is valid. And you move the funds to another address. So addresses are a way for us to kind of collapse and compress it. But behind that hash, you could have a multi-signature. You could have an ordinals inscription, right? Like this is like, I'm thinking about with inscriptions in general, there's two parts to the inscription transaction. There is the commitment and then the reveal. So you send funds to this address as the commitment saying like, hey, I have created this address. And then at a later time, when you go to spend, you reveal all of the inscription or the rules, whatever you did with that transaction. And so that's because you commit to a hash and then you reveal later all of the spending conditions. And this works for all types of Bitcoin addresses for the most part.
And so what Miniscript does is it takes the way we kind of send Bitcoin and you can start doing some like backflips with it. I don't know. I don't know if I should be too reductionist. I mean, I'm going to let you kind of like tease us out a bit more. Sure. Like, why was Miniscript different than Script? And also, why is it called Miniscript? Is it smaller?
So, I mean, Bitcoin Script, there's like 150 possible opcodes. I just sent you in a chat, and if you actually want to see what this looks like on chain, like this actual vault, you can actually click in the details and like pull it up on screen.
Gotcha.
What it's called Miniscript because they use basically 20 opcodes out of like the 140 that are floating around, and you realize that with these 20 opcodes, you can click them in certain arrangements called fragments, and it allows you to very cleanly do really large expressive things. Like think of them as like Lego bricks or puzzle pieces that click together, and you can do whatever you want with them within the bounds of Bitcoin consensus today. If you're doing signatures, thresholds, time locks, all of this stuff. And the biggest friction previously for wallet developers was that, okay, I want to build a really cool vault. I want to do something like, let's take a very simple example. I want to design a vault such that it's a 2 of 3 multisig, but if the funds have not moved in a year, I want it to be a 1 of 3 multisig, right? Like we call this decaying multisig or degrading multisig. This is something that you conceptually could do, but you hit a bunch of problems. One, are you going to design it the right way to make sure that there aren't like accidents that allow someone to maybe just steal all the funds? Additionally, now like maybe your hardware wallet or your signing, wherever you're signing it, has to be able to parse and understand what the heck am I even looking at? And then your whole wallet software, like how it's visualizing this, is not standardized. So what Miniscript does is it standardizes all of the areas around a transaction, the signing of it, the broadcasting of it, and it puts it on developer rails where if you support Miniscript, you can support any arbitrary Miniscript compatible vault ultimately. And so it opens up just a lot of use cases for being able to use your programmable money in a safe way today that really wasn't available previously. And it's been around since 2020, but it only over the past, let's call it 2 years, that people actually started trying to touch and build and like leverage on top of it use cases.
Yeah, and I've heard you talk about kind of the genesis, which I'll ask, how the genesis story. But I heard you talk about like, or even the basic concept of Anchorwatch and Trident Vault was like there are things that people are not using to basically evolve the self-custody technical landscape, and it took a few years to get to this grand release week. And I understand that's because you kind of had to dog food a lot of just the basic building blocks. Like, for example, like I remember when I first met you, Rob, you had, I think it was like a dozen ledgers out in front of you, and you must have been doing some crazy like complicated signing or testing or whatever. But
yes,
like what did this look like? Like I don't know. Why was this not built out yet? And what did you have to do to get it production ready?
So there were a couple pieces. Right when I started, this was in the fall of 2022. The company had been around for almost a year, and we were realizing that for large scale institutional insurance to support this, self-custody just wasn't going to cut it, right? There's just too many, like, I can't tell you how many people will be like, well, I'm just going to go on a boat and throw my keys into the water and then you can pay me a bunch of money, right? And all of these things. And so for us to be able to meaningfully, this was the other problem too, is that custodians today can't get one-to-one insurance because all of the risk is at one company. Whatever custodian you pick, all of the keys are at one company, one set of employees. And because of that, you hit a threshold of how much risk you're actually willing to underwrite as an insurer. So what we had devised was, what if we were able to leverage Bitcoin-Script in such a way that we could do more advanced custody? So as a basic premise, the way the vault starts is it's your 2 of 3 plus the Anchorwatch 2 of 3. It's a multi-sig of multi-sigs. Now, this is a really interesting concept just conceptually in how Bitcoin custody has worked up to this point. We call it the concept of negative control. And the whole point is, at no point ever is Anchorwatch unilaterally able to just take your funds, ever. It's designed, you can audit it yourself, like you can see it and visualize and understand that. Now, this is interesting because we could say maybe 6 months into your policy, you've lost a bunch of your keys. If you only have one of your keys, after 6 months, we can help recover funds for you. If you lost all of your keys, there's actually a 45-day window at the end where us plus a third-party recovery partner are able to come in and recover those funds. And when the insurance policy expires and we're no longer having a contract with you, you could just unilaterally move those funds as a 2 of 3. And this allowed us to start designing, like, how can we distribute risk and how can we mitigate risk, not only within an individual customer, but across multiple customers. And this was a huge unlock for the capital markets of insurance to be able to understand that we're not putting all of our eggs in one basket of one vault. Now, why did we have to build this all out? No one had supported this anywhere. There was one team, the Wizard Sardine guys at Liana Wallet, who had built a fully open source version of this. And the way they work is you have N of M, like a multi-sig, and then some time passes, and then a different multi-sig, and then a different multi-sig. But they weren't leveraging this like multi-sig of multi-sigs in this more advanced construct. The reason why we had to build it out is because no one else had done it yet at all. And the dev tooling was just really in a rough spot. We were fortunate to have Bitcoin Dev Kit, BDK.
Shout out Steve.
Which natively. Yeah. A huge shout out to the whole crew. it was all sitting there as part of Bitcoin Dev Kit. And actually, it was very funny enough. I emailed around this time I was starting to tinker with this stuff. I emailed Andrew Polstra and I said, hey, you built Miniscript. It's such amazing technology. Why is no one using it? Because I'm about to go all in on it, so to speak, with like my company, like product strategy. And he said, well, the problem is no one's really added hardware wallet support yet. And I replied back and I was like, hey, Ledger just added support last month. And this is like at the end of 2022. And he's like, oh, no one told me. Right. And that was a big aha moment that even a wizard like Andrew Polstra, who had built this whole thing, wasn't even aware that other wallet developers were now starting to integrate it into their stack. So the combination of hardware wallets supporting it and BDK sitting there as kind of like the universal like engine that runs the thing just became a really powerful unlock for us. And I think for us, a lot of the existing companies that work in Bitcoin have existing tech stacks that go back years. Like go back since when they were founded in 2017, 2018, 2016. And because of that, it's a code change for them to upgrade and add this functionality. Whereas for us, starting with a clean slate, we were able to build that all out. And so we're a very small team. And we just took the time diligently to slowly build this out to where we've now built our own entire infrastructure that can do the entire lifecycle of a transaction, setting up the vault, generating your deposit addresses, under the hood, all of the PSBT stuff is all abstracted away and it just works. And it's a really powerful stack, right? And now we can actually change other products or do other things. And it's almost like you just kind of take one puzzle piece out and click a new one in. And we're really robustly set up to scale in that sense. So it was just early days. It was the right time, right place, and kind of having a clean slate. We got to build out with, I would say, the leading tech. It wouldn't surprise me if in 5 years, not only is Miniscript being used at a lot of Bitcoin companies, but also all of the infrastructure is just going to be using BDK under the hood because it's a very powerful all-purpose engine that kind of can serve everyone's needs.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how if you're close to the tech stack in Bitcoin, you can see that we've had a lot of leap forwards with existing nothing, no forks, no nothing. It's just yet unexplored, really unproliferated design space. We can come back to that topic later because I want to talk about maybe what it looks like going forwards. But what do I not know? What's something interesting or something maybe that I or maybe the average person doesn't know about the custodian landscape in general? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of like obscure technical things and regulatory stuff, but like this is a lot of, me and a lot of people kind of hand wave and say, well, the custodians, they just take care of it. And maybe, and we have kind of a binary, they lost your funds or they didn't lose your funds kind of like conditional that we view them as. But like, feel free to get into the weeds or kind of pull something interesting out where like, what is something interesting that the average person doesn't know about custodians?
The many custodians, this is not all of them, but many custodians leverage something called MPC, multi-party computing, which I mentioned earlier. And the reason why is they want to have one vertical tech stack that can handle Bitcoin, Dogecoin, Solana, ETH, and everything else. And what MPC allows you to do is abstract all that key stuff and all the network stuff away, where you just have shards, like isolated like networks that are running each maybe a share of a key. And that allows you to have scale across many assets. The reason, like what we're focused on and working only on Bitcoin is we built directly on the Bitcoin tech stack. I can't lift this and take it to Solana tomorrow, right? We believe though that specialization allows for a greater fidelity and degree of control and security that isn't available if you're just doing an MPC arrangement. So I think that's one of the big things. And then the other one I mentioned earlier is just the massive, a lot of people are like, oh, they're insured up to 100 million, 200 million, 300, whatever it is. It's often an omnibus policy. So it's like the equivalent of if you had an entire city block and there was one insurance policy that everyone shared. If the whole block went down in a fire, not everyone's getting the full insurance payout, right? Additionally, you'd have to look at it. You, as the end customer, may not even be entitled to that insurance payout. It may actually just be insuring directly the custodian. So maybe the custodian is insured, but you're not insured, right? And I can't tell you how many times I talk to people like, oh, but this person's insured, I'm not worried about it. And it's like, if they're insured, you're not insured. Aren't you a little bit concerned about like that? So those would be the two things. I thought you were going to ask me something you don't know about Bitcoin.
Well, I want to ask you, what's something that I don't know about Bitcoin? Because let me tell you, Robbie, I feel a bit like the modern Peter McCormack here, where I discover things live during a podcast that I feel like I should have known.
Way more handsome.
I will say, I understand Xpubs probably better than he does, but
probably.
But what's about Bitcoin? Give me a couple of curveball or two.
What's the one piece of information that Bitcoin has that exists outside of the blockchain? Like, what's
Timestamp.
the one? What's that? The timestamp.
Timestamp on the block.
Yeah. So I figured because as a mining guy, you would understand this. But for many people at home, the way Bitcoin works, we have the difficulty adjustment, right?
Yeah.
So every 2016 blocks, 2 weeks passes. Now, the question, though, is that structurally, okay, 2 weeks passes. How does the Bitcoin network understand? Was that a long time for the 2016 blocks or a short time? And it's because every miner puts in a timestamp into the block. And there's actually a really funny thing in distributed systems, like how do you keep track of time? There's two constraints. You cannot, if a miner makes a timestamp that is more than 2 hours into the future, the node will reject it. And then on the back end side, you can't have a timestamp earlier than the median time of the past 11 block timestamps. So you have this gradually always increasing. It's very closely locked in by a couple minutes. It's always the same thing. That's actually how our time locks work. So if you have a contract that expires on, let's say, January 6th or January 7th today, 2026, like a year from now, we use that timestamp into the future, right? So it's actually based on a calendar time. You don't have to worry about the irregular nature of block production in doing a block height time lock.
So we could have relative confidence that, well, if I take the average time in, a 12 or 24 block period, I can probably know within high confidence that it's decent enough time to have scheduled, say, a halving party or something like that. I don't know.
Totally.
Yeah.
And you could do it based on the time. The halving party would be based on the block number.
Obviously.
Right? The Bitcoin network doesn't care about that. But you could do it based on the block number. Right. You could say the next halving's at block height 1,050,000, I think, 50,000. You could just have it so that that's the next halving block.
Or you could go back or you could look retroactively and say, just using my node, I can see that this block, that halving probably occurred in the afternoon as opposed to the early morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This is interesting. Random side follow-up question on that. Is this? I know it is an attack vector. I've heard of a time warp attack, but when Bitcoin developers get into the minutia and esotericism of discussion and surface area or risk surface area evaluation, have people proposed changing these at all? The time stamping or saying, look, make not a 12, a floating 11 block average, or I'm kind of curious about this. I've never talked.
So there's a couple things. I believe the Great Consensus Cleanup has some code changes related to this. Also in 2106, the year 2106, we actually have to do a hard fork because of the timestamp. Because what's going to happen in the year 2106, it will the timestamp variable will overflow back to 0. And because of that, we need to, at some point before 2106, add a change. And the reason why it's a hard fork conceived of today is that it's in the block header. And because it's in the block header, that's core consensus, because that's where the proof of work is. That's how you validate the block production. It has to be modified at that level. So we have 80 years to go figure it out. But that's something that's coming up on the horizon that we would have to figure out how do we change that and update it. So imagine changing the mining firmwire too and everything. It would be a big change.
Some people think 80 years might be rushing it, Rob. So we'll see. I mean, again, we'll come back to that. But, you are the Miniscript influencer. You're the only reason I knew Miniscript was a thing a year or so ago. Thank you.
Sure. You're welcome.
But what other uses for Miniscript might there be? I've skimmed through some of the resources that you have on your website, Anchorwatch. But what are other kind of unlocks or things that are people think you might be able to do?
So I think the biggest layup is just being able to do your own custody arrangement. It's almost in a way, Miniscript by default enables conceptually a DAO-like structure. And the reason why is you literally can have you have organization A and organization B, and they both must co-sign to move the transaction. You can have a organization C, which is disputing resolution. It doesn't solve the Oracle problem or anything, right? There's no allusion to that, but it abstracts these things into safe key problems for you to be able to manage. That's just a general thing. I think also escrow, loans. I think conceptually you could use I think for like lending and loans, you could actually have a different party who's just responsible for being the price oracle versus the person who holds the keys also responsible, right? Because you can use these, there are these things called hash locks, right? This is something that's used in Lightning without getting too in the weeds. You basically have a one-time secret. I give you the hash of it. And to be able to unlock it, you need the pre-image, the original secret, to be able to spend. So you can have someone that could just be like a price oracle who just maintains a bunch of hashes and pre-images and lets people plug them in, whatever, and they reveal the pre-image when a certain conditions met, whether it's price or a world market event, whatever it is, right? I think that's just a general, very underutilized use case, is just this idea of like a one-time password that isn't a key. Because the thing with a signature is I have to know that there's a transaction coming in and I have to sign it. Whereas if I just have a secret and then I just reveal it, I don't have to worry about the coordination of if there's 100 people or 1,000 people using that hash lock. Like it makes it a one-to-many that scales really easily for like a software provider or any business that wants to do stuff like that.
So, it's interesting because I've had a few conversations. This plays into the prevailing discussion on Bitcoin-script and expressibility, and it gets into soft fork discussion, which is, there is this idea, I think it's a very good and compelling idea, that like we have not really fully explored Bitcoin's existing capabilities yet. We had a really kind of shot across the bow of this with the discovery or an invention of BitVM, but right. BitVM itself probably, insofar as it's used as a bridge, has like certain challenges, like with liquidity obligations and spinning it up, and
right.
and we still don't have very many in the wild implementations yet. But I hear this narrative that like, well, we haven't fully explored TapScript or Miniscript or Bitcoin-script in general. We also don't know what we might actually discover by doing those things. Like, what is your take or treatment on this? Like, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah. So I wear two hats with this. One is just like my Anchorwatch hat, running a company and a business. I'm focused on kind of the art of the possible, of what's possible to be done today, because I can't guarantee that I'm going to get changes to Bitcoin in the future. And I would say I personally, like a lot of what we've built is kind of on this contrarian bet that there was better ways to do custody than multi-sig. Everyone basically, what you graduate from single sig and you go to a multi-sig, and immediately that was just like, and upon evaluating this was like, well, that's been the case for 10 years. Like, why aren't we doing more? Right. And so I'm fortunate enough to have a software kit built out like Miniscript that allows me to execute these more larger arbitrary vaults in a safe way. I think a lot of that, though, can be extended upon in interesting ways. For the overall, for TapScript, actually, we're looking to probably move over to Taproot ourselves and use TapScript probably Q2 this year. We're just using native SegWit for now, because again, a year ago when we were building this out, there was no hardware wallet support for it. Now there is. Now there's the Cold Card, the Ledger. I think the Blockstream Jade is adding in the Bitbox O2. Like other devices are adding the TapScript support, but you have to almost have like for our use case of like layer one securing funds, we don't want to have them sitting on a hotkey somewhere. So we have to wait for that full product cycle development to come in. I think for more arbitrary stuff, I think it's just very proof positive that there is a lot to be done out there. My other hat, though, is just as a citizen and user of Bitcoin, I would love to be able to have more advanced functionality to do like an op vault construction, right? My personal use case, my personal care, not just as a company, but me personally, is Bitcoin as a store of value. I care less about the payment medium of exchange use case, not because I don't think it's important and should be fostered. It's just not what I'm using Bitcoin for, right? I use dollars. They're great. I hold my wealth in Bitcoin. I want to make sure that my wealth is extra safe. So with that duality, like I agree that there's a lot more to be done and executed on today. I think the fact that there's only maybe 3 or so companies that are leveraging Miniscript. There's the Liana wallet, guys I mentioned earlier, the Bitcoin Keeper. They just came out with app that also supports it for vaulting functionality. I think of it also as a huge inheritance tool, being able to like, if I get hit by a bus in 10 years, I can give you a key and that key can move the money, but it can't do anything before the 10 years, right? Like those are things I think are just very foundational for thinking about store of value, intergenerational wealth transfer. That stuff is just very heavily underutilized today. And it's just going to take time for the whole ecosystem and people to get confident and comfortable with it all.
So I want to throw you some questions about Softworks, but I want to stay on the story of Anchorwatch because it's been very fascinating, and in particularly the origin story of Anchorwatch. I think one of the maybe underappreciated, cool like Genesis stories, because this came out of the Clubhouse days, the proto Twitter Spaces. Tell me about this, and give me your thoughts on the future of Bitcoin pleb angeling.
Yeah, sure. So let's say it's 2020, the lockdown and pandemic is starting to happen. Everyone's kind of like laying low inside. And this is around the time that Clubhouse came out as an app. It was interesting. I got invited. People were talking about these Bitcoin rooms. I joined and I sat in the audience for a bit. And very quickly, I realized a lot of people didn't know what the hell they were talking about. They would say things that were just outright wrong, didn't understand. So eventually, the easiest way to get to learn things is just start saying the wrong answer, and someone will come and correct you on the internet.
Yeah, it's a law of the internet. It's Brandolini's law.
Yeah,
it's actually got a name. Yeah, that's the name of it.
Yeah. So I start raising my hand. I start going on stage. I start talking to people, and it becomes evident pretty quickly that among everyone there, that I'm one of the more knowledgeable people in Bitcoin. And so a year goes by. These are people with on a Friday night, like nothing to go on. We're just like bullshitting about life and politics and families. During the day, it was almost like a corporate office where everyone would come in and ask their Bitcoin questions, right? And so this is going on for about a year. I'm getting to meet people like American HODL, NVK, who makes the cold card at CoinKite, Brad Mills. I'm meeting a bunch of people just in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And it's very funny. I start getting a little stir crazy. I had quit my job in the middle of this, and I was getting stir crazy trying to do something. I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll go work in Bitcoin. I know a lot about Bitcoin. People now know me in Bitcoin. I actually got my first invite to do what Bitcoin did around this time in this Clubhouse era before I ever started Anchorwatch, because I became known as someone. I started writing articles for Bitcoin Magazine, and it was really interesting. I'm like, I'm gonna start applying for Bitcoin jobs, and I start applying, and then American HODL says, Rob, you're way too smart to be working for someone. You should be building something in Bitcoin. And I'm like, yeah, I want to find the right idea. And quickly the idea for ensuring custody comes up, and I start thinking through it. And HODL's like, I'll cut you a check. Like, let's do it. And I was like, oh, okay. Like I wasn't asking for money. Like we were just like bullshitting. He's like, yeah, I'll cut you a check. And I was like, okay. So then HODL's cutting me a check. And then all of a sudden he basically, with a lot of his help, started whipping up a bunch of other angels. And all of a sudden I had an angel round. This was also where I met my co-founder, Becca. And, for a year and a half, 2 years, we had just been friends, bullshitting, chatting on the internet. Right. And then very quickly, she started off as an angel check. And then the first week of the company, I'm like running around with my head cut off, trying to do 1,000 things. And she started helping. And then all of a sudden it turned into her and I doing all-nighters. And then she asked to join the team and I was like, yes. Like the company wasn't even for me. I was like, yes, come on, join the team. And that was really like a huge moment for me, because these were people who I was just friends with on the internet. And then very quickly the idea for a company came up, and then I had a bunch of angels like capital coming in to start a company, not take a job somewhere else and start working on this. And that was a really crazy experience, for sure, to say the least.
I feel like that's kind of happening again in the ordinals land. Now, I don't know if any of these companies are like going to be worth anything, but it's JPEGs. But at the same time, like you see these like interesting emergent phenomena where a bunch of very highly passionate people dial into each other's personalities and skill sets. Some people have capital and money and wish to do that. And then you see a couple of these groups end up going to market. So that is the beginning of the Anchorwatch story.
It is. And we didn't even have a pitch deck, to be clear. Like it was like, Rob's starting a company. We're taking a bet on him. Let's go figure it out. Right. There was, it was very, very early days. It was very humbling too, because it was something I was never expecting. And then it very quickly started, changing my life forever.
Yeah. I mean, where does Anchorwatch go over the next couple of years? What's the short term, near term, like as the bull cycle heats up? What does it look like?
Yeah. So today we can, so just to explain, like the way our product works today is we can insure Bitcoin in our Trident vault. It's one-to-one insurance. It's your Bitcoin, your UTXOs. Like it's the best. It's a Lloyd's of London insurance policy. It's really the way that if you wanted to actually buy insurance on your Bitcoin, it's the best way that you can conceivably go about doing it today. I think for now, like we just launched. I think I'm running the engine for a year, kind of proving out the initial concept, something we've been building for a long time, would be the first step. We often talk about other product variants and ways that we can kind of leverage all of the tech and the ability to ensure that. I think there's a lot of ways that we can wrap that going forward, where maybe people don't want to hold keys at all. They just want multi-institutional custody. They want to distribute it out and just know that the funds are safe and there's an insurance policy backing them. Loans and escrow and like all of these different things. We think about it actually, if you borrow against your Bitcoin, traditionally, if you were to go borrow against your house, the bank won't give you a mortgage until the house is insured. We view that like in the grander scheme of things in the financialization of Bitcoin, it should be something similar. Like there'll be a marketplace of different options, but for that to not exist as an option, we just think is really shows how early days it is in just the financialization of Bitcoin. We ultimately, I view it as Bitcoin, like insurance carriers will be if there is going to be a world of Bitcoin banking in the future, why would you bank with someone who is not an insurance company? If they don't have the balance sheet to be able to indemnify you and pay you out, you're then in a position where you give your Bitcoin to someone and they have a 2 week of a balance sheet to be able to backstop if there's a loss or an incident. And if you're paying someone to hold your Bitcoin for you, right? If you're going to make the leap into having a custodian manage your keys for you, then what are you getting for in the value proposition if in the event that there's something that goes wrong, that you're not indemnified? Right. So I think that's like the ultimate bigger vision is kind of building out this like Bitcoin banking infrastructure for a financialized world. Today, policies are denominated in dollars. This is an interesting little relic of insurance regulation. If you're familiar with the FASB rules and the accounting treatment of Bitcoin, up until this year, basically, if you bought Bitcoin, you had to market at the lowest possible price that it was ever at as an intangible asset. It's even worse in insurance. If you're an insurance carrier and you buy Bitcoin, you have to write 100% of the value off on the strength of your balance sheet for accreditation and capital regulation purposes. So even though it's like it's highly liquid, instantly sellable, if you bought $1 million of Bitcoin, you have to write $1 million off on your balance sheet. So today, Lloyd's of London insurance carriers aren't sitting on large piles of Bitcoin bound on their balance sheets. Here's the thing though, as a longer term concept. If you had Bitcoin denominated policies, you pay in Bitcoin, you get your claims paid out in Bitcoin, you actually now start being able to rebuild insurance on a Bitcoin standard. And what that means is if you're the insurance carrier or the reinsurer and you put up a bunch of Bitcoin to backstop risk, you are risk capital, but you get a percentage of that premium, which turns into a Bitcoin denominated yield. Right. And this I view as like natural emergent finance that would emerge in Bitcoin, where if you have large capital providers to be able to provide this insurance banking infrastructure, they are going to get compensated for their services. Also, they are very highly skin in the game aligned to make sure your Bitcoin stays safe. Because if something goes wrong, they're going to be the ones that are out Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So this is ultimately where I think in the grand scheme of things, in a world where there will be custodians and everyone's not going to be self-custodying, insurance is just going to be a natural part of that infrastructure. And I think we're just the first mover to kind of see that bigger vision and then execute on it, not only on the insurance capital side, but also on the technology side for how do we actually build more robust risk mitigation today.
Bitcoin native, Bitcoin only, hyper Bitcoin future, where you have actual yield from the generation of real productive capital activity.
Exactly.
That is the Bitcoin future.
Yeah.
Okay. So take the Anchorwatch hat off. Let's put the Rob hat on, the MLG gamer hat on, or rather no hat at all. Oh, hell yeah. For the listener, he put the hat on backwards, so he's cool. This is the real Rob. Rob, what's the state of Bitcoin discourse like? On this podcast, I often, I like to say, oh, I'm, frustrated. We want to be pro soft forks, but like, I don't speak for you. What are your thoughts on the current state of Bitcoin discourse for future discussion?
I think it's a massive improvement to, let's say, 3-4 years ago. I'm not saying that it's good and healthy today. I think, though, it is trending in a positive direction. And the reason why I say that is people are often building solutions and they're kind of hitting up against the bumpers of without any sort of upgrade, this is kind of like the constraints of what we're hitting. And because of that, we're getting a better sense of like what should be added to Bitcoin. What are the minimal functional primitives that we can use to turn things on? developers are kind of loosely chatting about the different like opportunities and kind of ranking them themselves. If you look at Floppy Disk Guy did that Covenants wiki, right? And people are just starting to like, it's not signaling to activate a client or anything, but people are actually now having that discussion where I think 3 years ago, post Taproot, no one would have even touched it. So I think it's directionally good. I think people are putting out functional code. The BIP process has been cleaned up a lot too, where for years BIPs would just sit there not getting attention. There's now a more unified team that's kind of facilitating that pre-step of like finalizing code specs and implementation details for individual upgrades that can maybe get ensembled and put together. I think it's overall trending in a better direction.
I had Jameson Lopp on here a few weeks ago, and he's got his he's kind of put forth this narrative or this analogy of the SMTP protocol. Go listen to the episode if you're listening. If you're listening to this, go listen to that, which says as network grows, it gets harder to change. What are your thoughts on this? Is this a risk to Bitcoin? Are we currently SMTP-ified? Should we try to make efforts not to? Where's your head at?
I don't think we're there yet, but it is a serious, dangerous concern. I think there is a blasé nature of, we'll be fine if we don't get another fork. We'll be good. And I think so in that sense, like, I'm not saying Bitcoin goes to zero if that happens, to be clear. My concern, though, is that you are in a state where the natural forcing function will be to put all of the money in custodians' hands. And you're going to have a constant, especially with this rapid financialization of Bitcoin, with all of the ETFs and kind of the strategic Bitcoin reserves and all of this adoption, where it does pose a risk that the newer stakeholders that are entering the ecosystem don't have the interests of the network at its best interest, right? Because you can have a number go up machine as it goes today, right? Like, I'm not saying because if we don't get a fork Bitcoin, I'm not selling my Bitcoin, right? If we ossify, I'm not selling my Bitcoin. But it's important to understand, I think, the unknown unknowns. And that you always, in conversations, is, well, you don't know what's going to happen if we do this upgrade. At the same breath, you don't know if we don't, right? Because we very easily could have, and when you hear these arguments, I would always pose back, the same exact arguments you're making right now are the reason why we shouldn't have had the Lightning Network. I could have said pre-Lightning Network, there's no reason for this. Why are you doing this? We don't know what's going to happen, right? And Lightning Network got 3 soft forks to be able to run. It got 2 time lock soft forks, and it got SegWit as a soft fork. And because of that, it's hard for me to say that any heuristic and analysis you're saying of like, we don't know what's going to happen, so we should be extra careful and go really slow and not do anything. You should have just not added Lightning then, right? Like, it's the same exactly. It's an unfalsifiable claim. So my concerns would be kind of the institutionalization capture of Bitcoin in a way where the network isn't able to promote free and sovereign payments and permissionless money, because that's ultimately the core value, crux, and promise of what Bitcoin has as value. So I don't think we're there yet. I think we still have some runway left, but it's important. And I think the conversations are happening now about ideating about what the next force would look like. You also see stuff like, you get super infighty stuff like, I want TX hash, I want CTV. And you're even seeing among like those kind of developers, the new proposal that's being put forth for TX hash is just building on top of CTV. So at this point, I'd consider CTV as having relative consensus, because even if the people are like, I don't want CTV, I want CTV plus more, the people who are going to write the code for CTV plus more are building on top of CTV. So like, it's almost kind of like a constrained system where we're like, okay, we're all starting to come to an alignment of like the minimal primitives for the next step forward. I don't think we're SMTP-fied yet. I think it is a real concern, though. It's something that we shouldn't be blasé or casual about. It should be considered a legitimate threat, and it shouldn't just be seen as this risk-free, like, oh, we don't do anything, then nothing changes, then we're fine. Like, it's just not, I think, the full contextual picture to look it through.
Yeah, I like to say, like, okay, maybe Bitcoin is frozen and it goes to $10 million plus, and the dollar continues to deteriorate, and a lot of us here become comparatively wealthy, and but I'll probably lose my passion for Bitcoin. I'll probably go look at other freedom technologies, because that's kind of what brought me into it. So what are your thoughts on omnibus stuff like the Great Script Restoration, or like opcode suite packages, like we're going to do CTV plus plus cat plus check sig from, what are your thoughts? There's a lot of debate over specific discrete opcodes, but at the same time, we seem to have another side of the barbell, which is like, just we're gonna do a big old omnibus thing in the future. What are your thoughts?
Yes. So there's like the Great Script Restoration would be like that big other side where we're just going to do all of these things. I think even then that reasonably has to just be done in steps where you have a larger vision and there's a lot of moving pieces to go to something like the Great Script Restoration with having a whole new constraint of the variable operations budget. Let's put that aside from it. Like that's the most extreme thing. I think that sequentially has to be in steps. At the same token, I think rather than just being like a single opcode, I think there isn't really a single opcode that could be turned on today, with maybe the exception of cat, that would be able to add a whole new suite of use cases. Now, there's certain additive powers and kind of like leveraging of efficiency if you can combine these things, right? Like you mentioned before, like cat and CTV. I saw, I think it was Ben the Carman at the Taproot Wizards described it as peanut butter and jelly. They just go so well together, right? So if you want to do your cat scripts, it's really nice to be able to have a covenant with like CTV that's sitting right there to kind of like pair some stuff. So you have to do less things in native cat script. I think it makes sense too, because you almost can view like how the Lightning Network turned on with 2 different time lock opcodes in SegWit. It was all in the motion of getting Lightning Network turned on. And maybe we've learned better is like, we should be doing an ensemble, which makes sure that multiple constituencies in Bitcoin are getting their needs met. And we're enabling, given the low frequency of turning a soft fork on and adding things, you would be able to make sure that you have a critical mass of features being added that would allow people to actually build more advanced applications. So I think that's actually a pretty pragmatic way of going about things, especially because many opcodes are just like very small and narrow in scope that don't really do much. You want to be able to combine them to unlock new primitives. Like you want CTV and checksig from Stack if you want lightning symmetry. If you get one of them, it's kind of cool, but like it doesn't really unlock everything unless you put them together. So I think it's also maybe a more mature look at like Bitcoin development and being able to recognize how hard it is to turn things on, and that if you're going to go turn something on, you want to make sure that you're unlocking a new tier of functionality. And that even if you, let's say the next fork we ossify, you at least have something there, right? You're not kind of stranded in this in-between state.
Thanks for entertaining my piercing questions on soft fork discussion and conversation. We'll pull back, and I'll have you. We'll wrap up with my favorite subject, which is annihilating and setting on fire money that was on Ethereum. Specifically, teleburning. I feel one of
yes,
which is how I think my first real introduction to you, where you helped play a major role in teleburning a shit ton of money off on ETH to Bitcoin. What's teleburning, and how did you play a role in this?
So this was January of 23, well, 22, when ordinals really kicked off. Right?
23.
Yeah. 23. It was January 23. Wow, time flies. So I'm here at Bitcoin Park right now. This is where it all happened. There was the Bitcoin mining summit, and no, there was just you know what it was like in November or something before ordinals launched.
Class or some kind of like workshop or something, I think.
Yeah. So Casey, before ordinals blew up, volunteered to come out to Bitcoin Park and do like a script, like a class on ordinal stuff. Then ordinals blew up. Casey showed up. I had just moved to the park. I just moved to the Nashville area, and we started just talking and bantering and stuff. And I was following it along. It was kind of fun. And Casey's like talking about this concept on a stream or a podcast. He was like, I want to be able to like port assets from ETH over to Bitcoin. The way that works ultimately is that you basically could make an inscription. You can encode it to look like an ETH address, And then you can do a one-way pull where you can send an asset on ETH and you can send it over to Bitcoin as like a pointer. And he was talking about this. And if you know the guy, Going Parabolic, Jason Williams, saw the stream, knew that I lived in Nashville, knew I was hanging out with Casey. He's like, I want to burn a monkey. And I'm like, you want to burn a monkey? He had a Bored Ape Yacht Club. And I was like, you want to burn a monkey? He's like, yeah, I want to burn a monkey. And so I go over to Casey and I was like, I have someone who wants to burn a monkey. And he's like, no, really? I was like, yeah, I do. I was like, what do we do now? And he puts his hand on my shoulder. He says, well, Rob, we write the code. And we walk down the hallway and he sat in the corner and pulled out his terminal and starts going crazy. And the first thing he did actually is he went and burned his rotomore.eth, his ENS. He burned that as the first teleburn. And that's how he tested it in production. He just burned his, and then he then set up a time where me and Jason, we all got on a call, and then we burned the Bored Ape Yacht Club. And then Jason went off talking about how he sent his monkey to a nice orange heaven and burned that. A bunch of people started doing the teleburning stuff. Casey made a branch before it was like a feature in the GitHub. So then everyone started downloading and like running the Bitcoin code and like running the teleburn argument and started doing the teleburning. And it started with like a fun little frenzy there for sure. So I had a small little part in kind of kicking that whole thing off.
Yeah, I mean, that was it lit a fire under my ass because I think I was the third one, and I teleburnt a milady shortly thereafter. I had Sci4 help me do it. It was awesome. Yeah. Well, I mean, here's to lighting more capital on ETH on fire and porting it over to Bitcoin, where it could be insured and self-custodied.
That's
for
right.
The bright, glowing utopian future that Bitcoin will bring about. Rob, final thoughts. 2025, it's a big year for you. You could launch the company. Any, final thoughts and reflections?
Final thoughts. It's exciting to be building for a long time and actually be live. We've been kind of very quietly in the shadows working. The Bitcoin tech had actually been largely working months ago, but finalizing the Lloyd's relationship and doing that through all the proper channels was a time-consuming but well worthwhile endeavor. So now we're live. We can talk about a lot more of what we've built. If you're interested in learning more, go to Anchorwatch.com. Shoot me a DM on Twitter. You can shoot an email over to agent, AGENT at Anchorwatch.com if you're interested in signing up. And yeah, like I'm really excited because I feel like now that we're out in public, what I'm really excited about is getting more people building on this tech because it's open there for everyone. And I just think it's really going to be the future of how Bitcoin custody works. It makes it safe ways for you to be able to manage your Bitcoin, not only physically, but also across time. And I think this idea of time locking with security in your money is just a really powerful way to have intergenerational wealth, inheritance. And it's really exciting to kind of be building on this frontier and now live being able to share it with the world.
All right, Rob Hamilton, everybody. Thank you so much. And I'll see you in Nashville.